Africa Enlightenment Center, religious, political, and social enlightenment. Hi, welcome to Africa Enlightenment Center. In this video, Matt and Jimmy answer a caller from Australia, a theist from Australia, and then the guy tried to be smart. His question was answered from the very beginning, but he wasn't satisfied. So Matt and Jimmy had to take him on a ride. It's an interesting video to watch. Watch it and comment your opinion.
The
Hello?
question is,
There
yes,
we go.
the question is, how does appealing to a God solve any problem you've raised or would raise about morality? What does appealing to a God solve?
Just to come back to the point, so you mentioned that essentially what we should adopt.
I just fucking asked you a direct fucking question, and your response is to ignore that direct fucking. Your response is to ignore that direct fucking question and try to redirect.
No, I would like to rebuttal first because on the.
I would like you to answer the fucking question that I just asked you. I don't need a rebuttal because you're not in an argument.
But that was not my question. My dilemma here is: does atheism lead to the conclusion that evil is right? Whether I believe that God.
No, Laurent, shut up. I answered that question before you ever uttered a word. No, atheism does not lead to anything, period. I asked you a question which was very simple and direct, which is, what does appealing to a God solve? What problem in morality is solved by you appealing to a God? That's the question.
Sure, we can go there if you want, but essentially, if I believe in a God, then I come to a conclusion that...
Laurent, I'm muting you. When I ask you a direct question, here, I'm just going to tell you, I don't care what anybody thinks. It's because I'm smarter than you, and I understand this subject better than you, and I've spent more time thinking about it. So I'm asking you a fucking direct-ass question that will expose the problem in your thinking and save us all hours of time going around in circles. Is it helpful for me to put it that way? I try to avoid putting it that way, but you know what? I just got to call it like it is. This is a really simple issue. There is no problem that you've raised with regard to morality that is in any way solved by appealing to a God. And your foundational confusion, which we've addressed over and over and over again, is this notion of, does atheism lead to? And the answer is no, because atheism doesn't lead to anything. So whatever problem you presented with regard to morality, how is it solved? By appealing to a God. Once you realize, Laurent, that saying you're appealing to a God solves nothing, you will realize that you are complaining about things in morality that you cannot solve, that are just facets of reality, like a lot of different opinions. So, how does appealing to a God solve a problem with morality? Go.
So the belief in a God essentially allows me to essentially believe that there is a universal right and wrong for all of humanity instead of each individual person that makes their subjective conclusion on what is moral and not whatever.
No, the problem, no, Laurent. You just said that believing in God allows you to believe there is a universal right and wrong. But whether you believe there's a universal right and wrong is irrelevant to whether or not there is a universal right or wrong. You believing in a God allows you to convince yourself that there's a universal right and wrong, even though there isn't.
Yes, yeah, that is true, but that is where faith... Yes.
Hang on, let me jump in here because I'm going to pop back to the words you were saying before because you've actually refuted your own points already. Because you were complaining about if we... Stop, let me finish. You haven't even heard my point. There's no way to interrupt and no. If we are going with what you were describing earlier, that with the secular points of views, then everybody gets to just defend their position and one person could say something is right and somebody else is wrong and you want to avoid the clash. That's when I laughed at you, as though when the world has been the most filled with only religion, there were no clashes. And so Matt is asking you how you are solving this problem with an appeal to a God. And you're basically saying because that God says this is right and this is wrong. But somebody else, because your actual adoption was also subjective, says their God says your right is their wrong or their wrong is your right. It literally, as Matt is trying to get you to understand, does not solve your main contention. However, if you actually do have to have a moral justification that is secular, then you actually have to apply things like reason and go, for example, slavery is wrong because of the violation of the autonomy of the individual involved. And then you have to describe what all of those words mean. And you have to win that as an actual argument, as opposed to if you are in most religions where you I shouldn't say most, in many religions where you actually have to say slavery isn't wrong under certain circumstances. Your clash opposition is literally the basis of wars happening now and many clashes over the years. As Matt has said, it doesn't solve anything to add a God to it. In a lot of ways, it holds people back, because you will notice that nations that actually adopt some form of secularism, that have high happiness indexes, have independently come to roughly the same set of moral guides that affect their laws. And yet, with the religious governments, it's completely different because it's according to the whims of those who take power.
And it's even worse than that, Laurent, because what you're doing is looking at morality, seeing some problem, and then trying to find a way to solve it. You're not advocating for a God existing as a necessity to some facet of reality. You're arguing that belief in a God gives you comfort that there is some absolute standard of right and wrong, even if there's not. And if there's not an absolute standard of right and wrong, then every second you've spent advocating for a God, for morality, is actually you engaged in self-deception and dishonesty. Instead of looking for an excuse to keep believing in a God and not having to think about the difficulties of morality, give yourself permission to be honest and assess the situation and say, you know what? Maybe there is no ultimate, universal, non-arbitrary, passed down from on high, right or wrong. And yet there can still be, in much the same way that you can make good moves and bad moves in a game of chess, even though we invented it and the rules could have been anything, there are good moves and bad moves in that. Similarly, there are good moves and bad moves in life. And a really bad move in life is to go ahead and say, you know what, I'm gonna believe in a God because it provides me with comfort that there is universal right and wrong, even if there's not. You're basically saying you're willing to lie to yourself because it feels good.
Okay, I wonder when I'll be able to talk, but it's difficult to make a point.
You'll be able to talk. You'll be able to talk, Laurent. You'll be able to talk exactly when I stop talking. And you started by saying, "I wonder when I'll be able to talk." See, that's when you would be able to talk. And I would have allowed you to continue talking if you hadn't decided to be such a whiny ass about it.
How am I being a whiny ass about it?
Because the instant where you could have said something useful and important, where you could have said, hey, that's an interesting thought about morality, I'll have to consider that. Or you could have said, hey, here's something you said that was factually wrong. Here's a correction to that. Or here's an area where I said something that was incorrect that I hadn't considered, and I've now changed to this. But instead, you decided instead you just decided to fucking try and interrupt me. Instead of doing any of those things that are what a decent, reasonable person would do in an actual conversation, you decided to do a passive aggressive stroke of, am I allowed to talk now? Well, guess what? You're not allowed to talk anymore today. Call back some other time when you learn how to think about what was said and respond by saying, thank you for engaging my topic. Thank you for letting me know that I didn't have to sit here and invent a fictional God to give me fictional comfort, that there's a fictional universal right or wrong, and that I could actually reconsider and evaluate things with a goal of going with the truth and going to where the truth leads rather than whining like a little bitch instead of engaging in honest conversation. Goodbye, Laurent.
Hey, welcome back. Did you enjoy that video? Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and to share our videos. Don't forget also to support us with thanks. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.